year, new nail paint, same hello. Hi. Hello. Right. So, welcome to 2025. I was the first one here. As you all know, I can time travel. So, I decided to sneak forwards in time and record this video and then post it when I'm actually in January so that you peasants who cannot travel through time don't feel left out. So, welcome to my December wrap up video. So, I'm just gonna go through all the books that I read in December of 2024, 2025. Damn, that's a revelation. Anyway, so let's get into it. I read four books in December, which is both more and less than what I expected to read. So let's talk about it. Let's go through all the books. So in my TBR video, I said that the main three books that I wanted to read were Six Crimson Cranes, The Dragon's Promise, and The Familiar. And out of these three books, I read two books, Six Crimson Cranes and The Dragon's Promise. So this is a duology by Elizabeth Lim, and Six Crimson Cranes starts with this princess getting cursed by her stepmother, the princess, and her six brothers. So there are seven siblings, and she's the last one of them. She's the youngest, and she has six brothers. And as you can probably guess from the premise and the name of the book, the brothers get cursed and turn into cranes. And there's a lot going on. There's dragons involved, there's magic. It's a really vivid, descriptive book full of rich imagery. It's winter right now, and although I read it in the beginning of winter, I read it in December. It's really cold right now, and when I look outside, I am reminded of the time that our main character spends in a certain snowy place. Um, yeah, so I really enjoyed the book, and I have said this before because I've read this book before. So I've been talking about it in my TBR video, in my like little finishing my entire TBR video. I really enjoy the descriptions of this book. The writing style is simple, it's easy to follow. You have fun while reading it, and if you have, like, I have a very vivid imagination, so I thoroughly enjoy books that help me use that imagination and really get into the story. The characters were lovable, they were funny at times. There's a paper bird, there's an enchanted little paper bird. You meet her in the first few pages, so I don't think it counts as a spoiler. And she carries a lot of the story. Like, not carries, it's not like the other characters don't have heart or personality. All the characters are well written, and it's clear, like, even with the characters that we have minimal interaction with, it feels like, yeah, there's a person there. A person was imagined and we saw part of them, not like a two-dimensional character whose job was to say a dialogue and move on. um like, off the top of my head, I can think of just one character who seemed to appear that way, but all the other characters seemed fleshed out enough to me. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Then I read the sequel of Six Crimson Cranes, which is called The Dragon's Promise. There's a dragon involved, there are dragons in these books, and the ending took me by surprise, but not really. I don't want to spoil anything, so I can't really say more. But overall, I really enjoyed this book as well. It went slightly differently than I imagined it would, and I am glad for that. Um, because then it completely subverted all the expectations that I had. So I was just really glad to be along for the ride which is kind of what happened with Six Crimson Grains as well. I didn't really know that much about the book, and I just jumped headfirst into it. And I've said this before again that I had to take a whole day off to just sit and read because I couldn't get my nose out of the book. Ebook on the phone. So I'm glad that I have the physical copies now. But once again, I did read an ebook on the phone. I'm too lazy to open my laptop, and I don't have a Kindle, and like I don't really see the need for one because I tend to read mostly physical books and now audiobooks. So this was an exception. This was not on Audible. This was not on Storytel. I read Her Radiant Curse. I'm sorry, it's like 11 p.m. I'm exhausted, but really happy to be talking about books. Anyway, I read Her Radiant Curse, um, which is the prequel to Six Crimson Cranes and The Dragon's Promise, and it's a standalone novel. But here's the thing, it's not exactly a prequel for those books, it is a prequel set in the same world. It's a story about Shiori's stepmother, the main character's stepmother, the one who cursed the siblings. So I was just super immersed in this world, and I was super curious about her because I felt like I didn't get enough time for the character in the books. And well, the moment I found out that there was more, I wanted more, right? I really enjoyed these books. Um, but here's the thing, in the prequel, she's not who she is in the books, in the sequels. Um, because who we see in the books is who she is after a lot of events have passed. So she's a different character in the beginning. And I went in looking for her, and I met someone else who eventually turns into her, if you get my drift. And although it was not enjoyable, it just wasn't what I was expecting, so I didn't enjoy it that much. But otherwise it was good. There were a bunch of Easter eggs. There were some characters from Six Crimson Cranes and The Dragon's Promise who were in the um, prequel, Her Radiant Curse, and it was an interesting read. And in the prequel, the main story centers around the, like, there's a curse involved, Her Radiant Curse. But other than that, to me, it was just a simple story of the love between two siblings, two sisters. It made me miss my own sister. It's sweet. It's heartfelt. It just wasn't what I expected it to be, and for that reason, it shaped my reading experience in a way that I was not expecting. So, um, that made my like potential enjoyment of the book from what could have been to something less. But I wouldn't say that I didn't like it or that I wouldn't recommend it. It's just that I jumped into it with a different perspective and I got something else. That aside, those were the three books, the fiction books that I read in December. Anyway, the final book that I read in the month of December was The 12-Week Year, and I say read a bit loosely. It was an audiobook. I listened to the audiobook and I liked it. It was, I think the reason that I was able to like this book was because it was an audiobook, because it's quite repetitive. There's a lot of text in there that could have just been bullet points. A lot of the content of this book is the bookish version or the non-fiction book version of this meeting could have been an email. So this book could have just been the book summary, but because it was in audiobook format, it was much easier to digest, much easier to follow. It was like a 5.5 hour or 6 hour audiobook. So I definitely wouldn't have been able to read it, but in the form of an audiobook, it was easier to follow along. And I can just read this book and say, yeah, it was a cool book, it was a good book, but I'm actually gonna sit down and try to implement the 12-week year in my life. I'll tell you a little bit about what the 12-week year actually is. So it's like, the author says that instead of planning out our life in years, we should plan it in 12-week years. So basically, we pick a goal and we break it down into a size or a chunk that we can accomplish within 12 weeks, and then treat those 12 weeks as our year. So instead of evaluating annually, okay, all right, so this book was written in the context of companies, um, but it can very easily be applied to your daily life. So what he's saying is, suppose at the beginning of the year, like right now, a lot of people will have their New Year's resolutions, and there's this human tendency that if we skip out on a few days of our resolutions, like if I say that I have to journal every single day and I miss a few days, I'll be like, oh, it's fine. There's a lot of time in the year. It's a long time, so I know that I'll journal enough in the rest of the year. But that just doesn't happen, right? We keep slacking off, and then towards the end of the year, and this was a good book to read in December while I was evaluating a lot of things for this year. Um, so we then evaluate things at the end of the year, and we find out that we are way off the mark that we expected ourselves to be on. And for that for that reason, and from that perspective, this book says that you should have 12-week years. You should break your tasks down and your goals down into chunks that are big enough to be accomplished in 12 weeks, and then your each week is equivalent to a month. So you plan for each week, and you set some tactics, which are like basically, if I paraphrase it, like things that you do every day, or like your daily habits or tasks. And then you measure those tactics weekly. So every day is the equivalent of a week, every week is the equivalent of a month. And this way, you can have one or two bad weeks, but how many consecutive bad weeks? I know the answer is a lot. I know that this book was written in the perspective of companies. So I'm just saying what I've listened to. This is not my opinion. But the book says how many bad weeks are you going to have, and how many times are you going to have a reason, and if needed, you can adjust the plan. So, have I just over explained something to you? Maybe. But yeah, I liked the book, and I liked the way that it was written. It's broken down into two sections. One section is where it talks about the concept of the 12-week year, and it discusses all the things that are necessary to implement the 12-week year. And then in the second part of the book, it talks about the actual implementation. So in the first part, it's like you need to have a vision to implement the 12-week year, you need to have commitment, you need to have accountability. And then in the second part, it tells you how to implement those things. It tells you how to have a clear vision, how to have accountability with yourself, for the tasks that you haven't. What was that thing? It talks about commitment as a form of accountability. Accountability as ownership, sorry. It says accountability is ownership, like you are the one who is responsible for your scores, your tasks, your metrics. And it has weekly assessment meetings, or WAMs. I don't know if people reading the book are also calling these WAMs. WAM was just, it's fun to say. WAM. Wow. Right. So you're supposed to have weekly assessment meetings, and you're supposed to have a weekly execution score, WES, which they did not call WES. I don't know what's up with that. But so you track your execution score, and towards the end of the book, in the final chapter, they talk about how if you've achieved even like a consistently 85% or greater score on your weekly execution, this and um, you've completed at least 85% of all your tactics across the weeks, then even if you don't achieve your goal, you'll come pretty close. And that's true. Then secondly, there's coaching for what you can do at the 40% mark, at the 70% mark. So those are good. It was a little premature for me to, I guess, listen to them, but it was an audiobook. I didn't know what the content was going to be. So I think I'm probably gonna get the ebook or the physical book, whichever is like easier for me to find and whichever's cheaper. And yeah, I think I'll be there are a few goals that I think I can break down into daily tactics and have weekly assessment regarding. And it also talks about this concept of lead indicators and lag indicators. So a lead indicator is something that you can see right from the beginning whether it is going according to plan or not, and if you need to readjust. And a lag indicator is something that you see towards the end. So for example, if there's somebody whose goal is to um, lose a bunch of weight, then a lead indicator for that would be how many times they went to the gym versus how many times they plan to go to the gym. And a lag indicator would be at the end when they get on the scale and they check their weight. So that would be a lag indicator because the indication comes at the end with a lag. So it was really fun. I like learning. I realized that I do enjoy learning. And eldest daughter of an Indian household, love a good plan, love making plans. I'm gonna make plans. And finally, um like, this was a form of self-help book that hit for me, probably because I love planning, and probably because a lot of things that they talk about are things that I've always done some variation of. Like habit trackers are always there. It's just that, yeah, I've never considered creating smaller targets unless like it's a task that will be achieved in a smaller target. You generally try to like envision having this perfect life, but you don't see what you need to do to have that perfect life. And if you break those down and then break those down further until you hit a piece of it that you can complete within 12 weeks, it's just all planning heaven. It's fun. So I think I'm gonna try out the stuff that's in this book. And I realized that I do want to read more nonfiction, so I'm gonna set up like a nonfiction TBR. I have a bunch of nonfiction books on my shelves, and I've been trying to branch out my reading for the past couple of years. And I think this is a good time. This was a good nonfiction book that I thoroughly enjoyed, and this would be a great point from which to continue doing this. Maybe I could put it in my 12-week plan. That would be fun. So, this has been a rather chatty, long ish wrap up for my December 2024 reads. If you've read any of these books, if you've got any recommendations based on these books, I would love to hear that. If you're still watching, hi, congrats. Um, Thanks. And yep, I need to make a January TBR, so expect to see that from me sometime soon. I've got a bunch of books that I want to read, and I think I'm gonna set slightly loftier reading goals this year. So excited for that, and I'll see you guys in that video.